There's Jumbo.
Bonjour, Nia Nadezhnikosh, Kinokwe, Makwadodam, Alderville Donjaba. Speaking in the sovereign language of this territory. My name is Suzanne Smoke, and we join you here in a panel discussion to talk about the movie We Were Children that many of you just tuned into. I ask at this time that you take that moment to cleanse yourself, to look after yourselves, whatever that may look like in prayer. Go get some fresh air, maybe reach out to a colleague or a friend for support. There was a lot of real horrific truths that were shared in that movie, and interviews and words from survivors. So with that, I would like to introduce our panel. We have Laurie Hermiston, who is from the Nakii Collective and also is the director of Dashmaawaan Biimaadzinjin, We Feed the People. And also joining us is Indigenous Youth Ogitchidaa, Cedar Smoke, Chippewas of Georgina Island. She is the vice president of the American Indian Movement, Southern Ontario, and she also is a chef and cook with Dashmaawaan Biimaadzinjin and works with residential school survivors today. So we would each like to share a little bit with all of you across Canada about our role and responsibility to our communities when we are talking about the impact of residential schools and how it affects each and every one of us today here in 2021. So with that, I'll introduce Laurie Hermiston and allow her to speak to that. Laurie?
Thank you, Ani. My name is Laurie Hermiston, and I come from Batchewana First Nation in the North Shore of Ontario. It's right in the middle of the Great Lakes. So I always tell people, if you want to know where it is, you just look right in the middle. And that's one of our original territories for the Anishinaabe. It's the area where we all gathered and met. It actually is in Anishinaabe, it's called Biimaadzinjin, which literally means the gathering place. So that's where I come from, and the territory that I live in. My parents reside there in my community in Rankin Reserve, and that's where I started really my work, and kind of the first involvements I had with residential school survivors outside of my own family was I had the opportunity to be the elders program coordinator in Batchewana for a few years. And I also have a background in gerontology. I went to college for that. So I did spend time working with a lot of Indigenous seniors, like back in the early, the mid 90s really. And I remember at that time we were calling it residential school syndrome, if you remember that. And it was the way that it was described, which was really the intergenerational trauma, right? And that was some of the first times I remember learning about and hearing about that. It was never talked about in my own family. You know, my great grandmother went to St. Joseph's boarding school up in Thunder Bay. And we recently, as you know, Sue, were able to hold ceremony because we found her after 111 years. She was located after much searching and time spent by my family, by my mother and my grandmother and my great grandmother and my aunties and just my family for years. You know, we always heard the story of my grandmother going up to St. Joseph's boarding school and that she was raised by nuns. And then we heard that she had a sister that passed away at that school. And she was told when her sister passed, the nuns came to get her and told her that her sister was gone and not coming back. And that's all she heard. And she didn't come back. She passed. And that was in 1910. And my great grandmother talked about it and, you know, would tell stories about her time there. And, you know, there was always obviously a sadness about it. But we never knew how she passed away or what happened. Her name was Emma LaFord. And the story is pretty remarkable because my mom had really started to look more and search for her once all of our children were being located, right, and found. And so there was more of an opening, I think, and a willingness to talk to people. And my mother had to call around in Thunder Bay and made connections and eventually learned that Emma was buried up at St. Andrew's Catholic Cemetery in Thunder Bay in unmarked. And like, you know, you said earlier, like you won't call them graves because that, you know, evokes the notion of a memorial or a time of honor in that person's passing, or something that was thought out. And these are not graves, right? These are unmarked spaces that our children were put into. So my auntie is in one of those unmarked spaces up at that Catholic gravesite, and we discovered that. So we went up and were able to hold ceremony for her. We've sang for her. We brought items up from home and buried them where she is. And we marked that she is there. My family went up and did that, and then they went and held ceremony for her in Garden River, where her family is currently buried. So, 111 years she was missing, and in my family, that was the experience that, impacted so much of the way that we were raised, the way that we learned to love, the way that we learned to understand ourselves in relationships with ourselves, with our partners, with the world around us. And it, created a lot of spaces where hurt existed and things were harder at times to get through. And, you were confused and didn't understand a lot of the things that happened when you were young, because, you didn't have friends that had homes like that. If you were like me and you were mixed and you grew up in a city around other people, and no one really talked about the fact that you were Native, because it was something you tried to hide, or if you could, right, you would live in that gray area. And so, yeah, like, even when they talk about my grandmother's experience at residential school and my auntie passing, my grandmother would say, like, that my great grandmother was raised by nuns and that it was okay, and it couldn't have been okay, right? We know that. And so it was always kind of keep your head down, keep your mouth up, quiet, and don't say anything about all kinds of things. And as time grew, my mother went back to school. She and most of my aunties did, but my mother really went back to school, and she became a nurse, and she began to practice the culture and the, like, Anishinaabe, right? The whole circle of everything: language, culture, celebration, ceremony, and dove in, like, arms, feet, like everything. And she's now Medeawin and practices in that lodge. And it saved her, I think, and it changed the trajectory of where I was going, because she began to believe in herself more. And it then impacted me because I was a teenage girl at the time. So, yeah, like, I don't think people realize the intergenerational trauma and how it impacts and ripples into our lives in the way that we come out in the world, and what we can believe in ourselves, and how hard it is to get past that. And I think the other part about it that's really difficult for me is that it's directly related to a racist legislation, and like, intended desecration of a people. Like, it's the most oppressive thing. So for me, that's why, like, I always explain to people it's different, because it's a government legislated trauma, really, is what it has been. And, like, finding my great auntie and bringing home and all of that, it's kicked up a lot of pain in my family, and my mom and my aunties, I think, but even in me, because I have to really at times weigh out, like, that things have changed, my family has changed, but there still is old hurt and trauma. And I know that it's all directly related to the fact that my mother is Anishinaabe Kwe. And it's hard to reconcile that. I have a beautiful daughter who is going to be 20 years old, and she's Mohawk, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe, and a little bit of Italian and Scottish, but she's three tribes. And, like, she carries all the gifts of the creator and the generation that she comes from. And her name is the sound the spirits make when they come. It's Jongwewe Gabo Ikwe. And I'm, watching her and seeing all the things that she's doing and what she's going to become. And you just know, like, things are going to be okay, right? But she still in her life can say that she's been impacted by it. It's not gone yet. So I think the message I would say is that you can't do this to people for hundreds and hundreds of years and expect everything to be perfect, or us to just get over it. Because I can say that my daughter's been raised in all the ways that, like, we wanted, ceremony, her name when she was born, the same way as Cedar here. And there still is impacts that I know that she has. So hopefully, you know, in a few generations, it'll just be a story that we tell them and not something they have to live through. So, miigwech.
Miigwech, absolutely. And our roles as mothers, you know, raising our children through this grief, through this hurt, through this trauma, you know, each and every one of us as Indigenous people across Turtle Island live trauma every day. It's not something that we get over. It's not something that is history. It's a daily effect on our lives. Absolutely. And so, you know, you talk so highly of your daughter, and she's such a gift and a blessing. I also want to introduce my daughter, Ogitchidaa. This is Cedar Smoke, head woman of the Sky World, and absolutely a gift. And again, you know, struggling through decolonizing. I may have changed the trajectory of where she was going, but she also changed my trajectory of where I was going as a mother, and as a life giver, and being that sacred being and carrying that new life. That's such a gift. So I'll introduce Cedar. And Cedar, if you just want to share with us the importance of culture and ceremony in your life and the role that you play now in our communities, how you have seen the impact of residential school.
Bonjour, Biindigen, Ogitchidaa, Biindigen Dodam, Georgina Island, Donjaba. My first name or my decolonized name is Cedar Spoke, and my Ojibwe head woman of the Sky World. Speaking in the sovereign language of the Ojibwe people, and it's really a gift and an honor that I have that little bit of language that I carry right now. Because working with the elders that I do right now with Dashmaawaan, Biimaadzinjin, and Laurie here, I work with a lot of those residential school survivors. And, you know, working with them, it's hard hearing their stories, thinking, you know, that happened to my aunties, my uncles, my dad, my grandparents. It's with a heavy heart that I think of them every day. And like, I walk with my elders, and we have to learn how to handle those intergenerational traumas, because like Laurie said, even though that we have that future and we know we walk with culture, we walk with everything, it does really affect us still right now. And when I speak in that language, it's such an honor to be able to do that, because we lost a lot of the language carriers. We lost our knowledge keepers. We lost our elders, our teachers. And those are those little babies that were there. And I work with the people who are here now who could have been those little babies, we could have lost there. So it's nice to be able to see them, work with them. Our food program is really nice. It helps them, and it's so nice to be able to like expose them to that and be able to bring them out to events, and have dancers and drummers there for them to experience that culture, to know that we're still here, that our youth are still picking up those spaces. We're taking up space. We're making sure like we're practicing our culture. We're practicing everything. So it's beautiful to work with them. And I'm just really excited, you know, I have that space with my new auntie, Laurie, and all the aunties that we work with in Dashmaawaan. I met so many nice people, so many good people. And I'm still learning on my journey, learning my culture, learning my language, learning all my traditions through working with my mom, going to ceremony, and working with all the aunties right here now. And, you know, teaching those ceremonies to other youth, including other youth, making sure youth are coming in. And it's always nice to expose them to the elders as well, and doing that work with them. So thank you. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Cedar. And I know that many of us, and the three of us, have spent many times out in the front lines, so to speak, working with our houseless community, working with seniors, elders, residential school survivors, and really seeing the impact firsthand. And what strikes me when I'm working with Dashmaawaan, when I'm working with all of the frontline aunties and Indigenous people, is that caring heart, and feeding each other's spirit and lifting each other up. And that's what I see, is that, you know, we are healing our own, and it's through our medicine people, and it's our bundle carriers, and it's, you know, those ceremonies that are saving us. It's the language that's saving us. It's tied to the land and to the water. So I'm actually going to ask Laurie if you can talk a little bit about that food and feeding people's spirit, and what is that role and responsibility that we have now in decolonizing and healing the trauma of residential schools right now.
Thank you. Yes. So we work with a program called Dashmaawaan Biimaadzinjin, which means they feed the people in Ojibwe. And it was started last year in June of 2020 around Indigenous Day, June 21st, and summer solstice. And it really was just started, people ask, like, was it about COVID and a response to that? And I think what COVID did was just allow there to be perhaps people with a bit more time, because they weren't necessarily having to sit in the office in the same way. So we could do other things and balance our lives out differently, right? So we had time to do things like make food and, organize like people and dancers and drummers to come out and do ceremony, hold space for the people that are houseless, Indigenous people here in Toronto. And so the first time we did that here in Parkdale, and we brought food, we brought drummers and dancers, and held space with some people that I think a lot of our community, at times that struggles with substance use and, alcohol, drugs, anything like that. They're often shunned away from ceremony and shunned away from spaces and places where people believe that sacred, items are, and they really shouldn't be exposing these sacred items to people that are under the influence of anything. So there's a lot of judgment, right, that comes with that. And we practice harm reduction, which is frontline support of people that are using alcohol and drugs, and providing them with safe solutions to, ensuring that they can live the best life that they deserve to live, right? So that's a lot of the work that we all do. And we found that there was a need to kind of gather. And so we did that, and we did that in Parkdale, and we brought drummers and dancers, and we feasted. We brought, traditional foods. And a lot of these people that came and ate with us had said that they hadn't had like deer or moose in like 20 years. They hadn't been able to have any fresh fish. One of our elders here knew exactly where the fish came from when he ate it. He said, that's Lake Erie perch. So that in itself is like cultural connection, right? It's memories of when they were children, and times when they were living on the land, or when they had access to land. And, they're eating their own foods. They're eating foods that are traditionally Indigenous grown, Indigenous harvested, and things that many of them had access to when they were young children, because many of the folks that are houseless here in the city are residential school survivors, and are also survivors of 60s scoop child welfare, all of these mechanisms of oppression that have come in and taken their lives apart, really dismantled a lot of their lives. And so we started doing that. And then every single Sunday we were down in the encampments here and in different spaces and places, working alongside Toronto Indigenous Harm Reduction to bring food to people, warm soups, again, lots of traditional items in them. And then we started working with the elders at Wigwam and Terrace. So now we bring in about 400 meals a week to the elders. We serve about 60 of them, and we bring them about 4 to 5 days worth of food with dessert. They love the dessert. It's their thing. So we try to give them healthy, whole food, all of it's homemade, traditional foods when we can. And we also do, weekly connections with them when we drop off the food and they come down and get the food. So we do activities. We bring in music. We bring in cultural activities. We had a big feast with them about a week ago, where we brought about 60 of them down to an outdoor space on a bus, and we feasted them all day with music and traditional drumming, and said they felt like they were at a garden party. So, we're doing that, and it's just little connections, and it's making an impact in their psychosocial, well-being, their health. One of the elders said, it was so nice to just put our feet in the grass and walk around and feel safe to do that. Right. So little comments like that. And we work with a group of dynamic women and Two-Spirit folk in the kitchen. Cedar is one of them. She's our youth. And we have, the whole program really honors the role of rematriation and what that looks like, and women's roles and Two-Spirit roles. And, we counsel each other, and we allow each other space to be happy and upset and grow as women and talk and, support not only the elders with meals and the houseless folks, but also women, because we pay our, kitchen staff and allow them to then support their own lives. And so it's like a ripple effect of how we can feed, the community around us, which I guess is kind of in the name that we're called, right? They feed the people. So yeah, like we've been working really hard, and we do a lot of crowdsource funding. We have a bit of money. We kind of pull together here and there to make things work. But we rely on donations, donors, and when we can find grants that fit with what we do, because it's important for us to remain sovereign and remain focused on the idea of Indigenous food security and supporting our seniors and our houseless folks in the right way. So it limits, like we won't just go out there and fundraise and take money from places that don't make sense, right? Because we have to honor those principles of Indigenous ownership and control over what we do. So, and honor what the seniors want, and make sure that they're always at the front of how we work. So yeah.
Miigwech. And it's about elevating their spirit and feeding their spirit through that food, through that blood memory, through that ancestral connection to the land and to the water. So Miigwech, Laurie, and Cedar for doing that work. And my role and responsibility in community, I work in sexual assault, domestic violence, and mental wellness, and really understanding the huge impacts this past summer. But, for the last 500 years, the impact, and really understanding that we're not going to heal overnight. We're not going to get over it. And Canadians' role really is, sit in what reconciliation is, and that's going to be uncomfortable. And there's going to be uncomfortable conversations. And, let's get past denial and dissuasion, and let's really talk about truth. And if we can't have truth and accountability and justice for the survivors and their families, how can we rush forward to reconcile? And when so many Canadians don't understand or know the truth, so our recommendations is that you read the Truth and Reconciliation Report, adapt some of those findings into the way that you interact with Indigenous people. When you're engaging to work as an agency to help heal or work with First Nations people, how many people do you have on your board? How many people set policy that are elders within the local communities? In your resources of toolbox, or in your toolbox of resources of people within our communities, do you have elders and medicine people and people that know firsthand about colonial trauma and violence enacted through residential schools and through the Indian Act, and so much legislation that has really outlawed everything about us? And Laurie, you use the term houseless, and when we talk about houseless, we as Indigenous are not homeless when we are on the land. We are houseless. And so really understanding that we can't criminalize Indigenous people for being houseless when the land and the Indian Act has made us also vulnerable, and really ripping us from our homes and through the residential schools, really disconnecting and breaking that family structure, and really breaking the hoop of that family circle. So there will be links in the bottom if anyone is wishing to support Dashmaawaan, Biimaadzinjin, and the food programs that supports the elders and survivors of residential school, as well as our houseless folks. Those connections will be there. It's Dashmaawaan, Biimaadzinjin, and there's a GoFundMe through Facebook, and we'll put the links in. Also, Biindigen Healing and Arts, that is a grassroots York region. We created that, Cedar and I. We do food box programs, Christmas hamper programs, and really just basic grassroots filling in gaps in services, because so many First Nations people really struggle working through and navigating the healthcare system that is really oppressive and racist, and really does not support our healing journey as Indigenous people. So as Canadians watching and hearing the voices and really seeing the impact firsthand in our lives, but in lives across everyone that is Indigenous across Turtle Island, how can we move forward together in right relationships? And that's by taking ownership as Canadians, in reconciling with us as First Nations people, understanding how magnificent we are and the contributions that we've given to Canada to settlers and guests here within our territories. So with that being said, Chimiigwach to you ladies for doing the tremendous work that you're doing with the survivors. And just if anyone is looking for support or seeking help after watching the movie, again, there are many links that are going to be showcased here, and reach out to any one of us within Dashmaawaan, Biindigen, and we will be there to help and support in any questions that you have. So reach out, Dashmaawaan Biimaadzinjin on Facebook, and we will post the GoFundMe. And please, for all of the survivors and their families, our prayers are out to each and every one of you during this time. Know that your voices have been heard. The voices of those young ones are not lost. We found them, and with that, there's a great change and a great uprising of our young people that are here today. They have survived, and our culture and our language and our way of life is what is healing our communities now. With that, Chimiigwach to each and every one of you. Reach out in a good way, build those right relationships, and it is Canadians' role to reconcile with us as Indigenous people. Chimiigwach, have a good night. Thank you.